Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the Horseshoe Crab Board to order. And before we get rolling, Ms. Kearns, you have an announcement for us this morning?
Thank you, Mr. Reed. I just wanted to let the commissioners and the audience know that today we are being filmed, as well as Rick Jacobson is online for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I don't believe there's anybody else. Oh, and that is it.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kearns. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Eric Reed. I have the honor of sitting up here with Captain Couch, Ms. Starks, and Dr. Nehemiah to get us through Horseshoe Crabs this morning. We got some business items to do, some action items. First, approval of the agenda. Does anybody have any problems with the agenda? Seeing none, agenda is approved by consent. As far as the proceedings for May 2025, is there any edits, changes? Are we good where we are? Seeing none, approved by consent. Next, public comment. We don't have anybody signed up for public comment, but we always like to hear from our stakeholders in the public. Is there any public comment this morning? Anybody online? Seeing none. Okay, so now let's get to work. First thing we're going to do is we're going to get a presentation from Dr. Nehemiah on the ARM model, and then Ms. Starks is going to walk us through the specs package, and then once we get done with that, we have a few other action items. So, Ms. Nehemiah, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. For folks I haven't met around the table, my name is Samara Nehemiah. I'm a new stock assessment scientist with the Commission, so I'll be presenting the results of the ARM framework since John Zwiga cannot be here this week. So the Adaptive Resource Management Framework was devised and accepted by use for management by the board in 2022. So the Addendum 8 allowed for, well, I guess I should back up and say, previously up until now, the Addendum 8 allowed for the ARM to be updated annually to set bait recommendations for the Delaware Bay. So under the ARM framework, the maximum harvest that's allowed are 210,000 females and 500,000 males. And so just a reminder of what the ARM recommended last year. So recommendations from the ARM were 175,000 females and 500,000 males, but the board opted for 0 female harvests and a 2-to-1 offset. So the objective statement of the ARM is to manage harvest of horseshoe crabs in the Delaware Bay to maximize harvest, but also to maintain ecosystem integrity, provide adequate stopover habitat for migrating shorebirds, and ensure that the abundance of horseshoe crabs is not limiting the red knot stopover population or slowing recovery. So annual harvest specifications require a couple different population estimates. So first, it requires a red knot population estimate from a mark resite analysis, which is conducted by Jim Lyons at USGS. And it also requires horseshoe crab population estimates that are for both males and female crabs from the Catch Multiple Survey Analysis, or CMSA. And so some of the data inputs that go into the CMSA are a few different fishery independent surveys. So it has a Delaware, and I'll also talk about the data that we use for this. So it has a Delaware adult trawl, which we use through 2024, a New Jersey ocean trawl that we have through 2024. It has 2 indices from the Virginia Tech trawl, which are sampled through 2023, but we lag these surveys forward to match kind of the timing of the other surveys. And it also includes discard estimates, bait landings, and biomedical mortality through 2020. So here on this slide, you can see estimates from the red knot population estimates from the mark resite analysis. And so these estimates are in the black, and the 95% confidence intervals are in the gray shaded lines. And you can see a slight increase over the last couple of years. So the 2024 estimate were just over 46,000 red knots, and then increased slightly in 2025 to 54,000 red knots. I'll note that in the ARM, we use population estimates for 2 years prior. So in order to get recommendations for 2026, we're using the 2024 terminal year of red knots, but we wanted to show 2025 here for your reference. We can also see on this slide estimates of female harvests that are used in the CMSA. And so we have the female bait landings in the white bars, which have decreased obviously since 2012, but there is still some in 2023 and 2024 from Virginia, which are assumed, some from Virginia crabs are assumed to be from the Delaware Bay origin. We can see the discards in black, and these are pretty variable from year to year, but in the last few years have been a pretty small component. And then the coastwide biomedical data is shown in the gray bars. We're showing coastwide because Delaware Bay is confidential, and has been increasing over time. Here we see the same plot, but for the male harvest. And so in 2024, the bait landings declined slightly. Again, discards in black are pretty variable, but a small component in the last 3 years. And then again, coastwide biomedical mortality has increased over the time series. Okay, so here are the indices of abundance that we use for input in the CMSA model. So here are our indices of abundance for female horseshoe crabs. So we have the 2 Virginia Tech indices in black. So the Virginia Tech newly mature index in the dashed black lines, the Virginia Tech mature index in the solid black line. And I'll point out that the axis for that is on the right-hand side. The Delaware adult survey is in the solid gray line, and the New Jersey ocean trawl is in the gray dashed line. And so you'll note that the New Jersey survey and the Virginia Tech newly mature index had a slight decline from 2023 to 2024. The Delaware had a slight increase, and you'll note that Virginia Tech newly mature had a really strong increase from 2023 to 2024. I'll also, go back really quick. Note that the Virginia Tech newly mature index for the females was corrected based off of recommendations from last year's ARM, and I'll go into kind of that in the next few slides. So now we can look at the same surveys for the male indices of abundance. Again, the Virginia Tech newly mature survey and the New Jersey index showed a slight decline from 2023. The increase from the Virginia Tech mature trawl, again on the right, the axis on the right-hand side, shows a really strong increase compared to the female index. And so as a reminder, there was a correction made for the female Virginia Tech newly mature index. And so I'll go through this a little bit quickly since it was already agreed upon last year, but I'll just remind folks what we did this year. So the Virginia Tech trawl recorded 0 female newly mature horseshoe crabs in 2022. And because the way the CMSA, sorry, there's a bit of an echo. Okay, just want to make sure it was off. The CMSA is set up, it has a hard time interpreting zeros in the indices. And so after further inspection, it was noted that there were low abundance of the newly mature females from 2020 to 2024. And there were a few different hypotheses that went along with why that could be, but we thought it was decided that maybe the likely cause was potentially misidentifying some of these female crabs into other life stages. And so after talking with folks from Virginia Tech, it was assumed that the samplers were likely misclassifying newly mature females as immature females. And so because there was an increase in just the number of crabs during their sampling events, it made processing their samples difficult, and it was likely that they just weren't processing a representative subsample and weren't probing as many female crabs for eggs. And so in order to correct for this, it was hypothesized that males in a year T should have a positive correlation, a positive relationship with females in year T, female newly mature crabs in year T+1 because they're from the same cohort. And so the difference in newly mature females in year T+1 should be similar but lower than males in year T due to natural mortality if they're experiencing the same natural mortality. And so when we plotted that relationship with the newly mature males on the x-axis and the newly mature females in the next year in the y-axis, you see that relationship here. A significant positive linear relationship with a slope is less than 1, suggesting that the natural mortality is the deciding factor. And so we corrected for the Virginia Tech female newly mature index with this kind of relationship, assuming it has the relationship with the newly mature males. The good news is that the Virginia Tech crew corrected for this misidentification, and so the report for what would be our 2025 year does show that newly mature female crabs back up to a more reasonable level, so we should not have to make this correction after this year. So now we can look at the results of the CMSA and the population estimates of the horseshoe crab. So on this slide, we're seeing female horseshoe crab abundance with 0 biomedical data in the blue lines and coastwide biomedical data in the red lines, and then those gray shaded areas of the 95% confidence intervals. These results are very similar, so they look like they're right on top of each other, but they aren't exactly the same. And so you'll note that in 2024, there was a slight decline in horseshoe crab abundance, just slightly under 20 million female crabs, but was pretty stable in the last 2 years. And I'll note that the confidence intervals are pretty wide. And then similarly, we can look at the estimates of male horseshoe crab abundance in the Delaware Bay. And in 2024 saw more of a decline from 2023, but overall the population has been increasing over the last few years. So as a reminder, harvest recommendation is based on the results of the CMSA, so those horseshoe crab population estimates and the MARC recite models for red knots. And per addendum 8, harvest is rounded down to the nearest 25,000 crabs. And so the ARM for 2026 recommended a harvest of 500,000 males and 175,000 females. And so I'll pass it off to Caitlin for the specs.
Thank you, Dr. Nehemiah. So this year under Addendum 9, the board has the option to set specifications for up to 3 years for male-only harvest using the ARM recommendation. The purpose of Addendum 9, again, was to allow the board to maintain male-only harvest while considering changes to the reward utility and harvest policy functions of the ARM, which was a recommendation from the July 2024 stakeholder workshop, and we'll talk about that next on the agenda. So the options on the table for today are first to adopt male and female harvest limits as recommended by the ARM framework, or second to adopt male only specifications for 1 to 3 years. If the board chooses to establish male only specifications for multiple years, that would mean next year the ARM would not have to be run and there would be no action required to maintain the specifications for another year. But the board would still review the horseshoe crab and red knot survey data and have the ability to set more conservative specifications without running the ARM framework next year. So these are the state allocations for male and female horseshoe crab bait harvest based on the ARM output for the 2026 fishing year. The Delaware Bay origin harvest quotas are on the left and the total quotas are on the right, and those include the non-Delaware Bay origin crabs for Maryland and Virginia. And then in the bottom table are the state quotas with male only harvest of 500,000 crabs and the 2-to-1 offset for Maryland and Virginia given no female harvest. So today the board again is considering setting specifications for the bait harvest for the Delaware Bay states, given the ARM framework outputs and the possibility of multi-year specifications under Addendum 9.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Ms. Starks. Any questions from the board? Anybody online? Anybody in the public? Okay, seeing none. What's the pleasure of the board here? Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I'd like to make a motion. I believe the motion is available to be put up. I'll wait till it's up there so I can read it. Okay, I move to establish male-only harvest specifications for 2026 and 2027 based on the ARM framework with 500,000 male and no female harvest of Delaware Bay origin crabs. In addition, the 2-to-1 offset will be added to Maryland and Virginia's allocations due to no female harvest. And if I can get a second, I will give the rationale.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Is there a second for this motion? Mr. Borden. Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As has already been mentioned, one of the reasons that we are looking at these multi-year specifications is because we wanted to get more input from the entire gamut of stakeholders for horseshoe crabs. And I believe that going with 2-year specifications is the right balance here. 2 years will give time for the new stakeholder input to the arm that we will be discussing after this item to be fully incorporated into the new utility functions for the arm. Understanding that's been one of the complaints about the arm, which of course is peer-reviewed, excellent science that we've been using to set these estimates. So I figured, like I said, a good balance here. We have the estimates recommended by the arm each year. Each year they've been recommending that we can take a small number of females in addition to the males. We have not been doing so because of these concerns that have been raised. This will give ample time for those concerns to be incorporated into the model, and hopefully at the end of 2 years, when the arm is run again, we will be having results that come out that will be much more accepted by the entire range of stakeholders of horseshoe crabs. So that's my explanation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Borden, any additional rationale?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My only question, this is a question, John, is the 2-year versus 3 years. As I understand it, there's no downside in 3 years. In other words, let's say we do everything that John wants to get done on in a 2-year time frame, and we want to reconsider the numbers at the end of 2 years. There's nothing that prohibits us from doing that. And I'd ask the staff to correct me, Caitlin, or the staff to correct me if that's the erroneous interpretation.
So hang on. Do you have 2
And then
questions?
I've got
one for John Clark, or do you want Ms. Clark's to respond?
I'd like the staff to just make
Okay,
sure
good.
that that's correct, and then I'd like John to respond.
Ms. Starks.
So your limitation is that if the arm is not run, then you cannot establish female harvest in a year during a multi-year specifications period that's already been set. You can establish more conservative male only harvest. But if the board tells us in advance, we do want to run the arm this year, we can do that. There's nothing preventing that from happening. So there needs to be a new arm run in order to change from a male only harvest specification to a female and male specification.
Mr. Clark?
Yeah, to respond to David's question there, the reason as I said, I went with 2 years, I think it's a good balance. As we know, if we go back to when the new arm model was peer reviewed and accepted for management use, I believe that was 2022, 2023, both the old arm model and the new arm model estimated that a small amount of female harvest could be allowed. The board did not allow female harvest. We heard from the certain stakeholders, particularly on the red knot conservation side, that were very alarmed by the thought of any female harvest. We took those concerns into account, and we have not allowed female harvest. But at the same time, we do have a number of our people involved in the horseshoe crab fishery that, of course, would like to be able to harvest the small amount of females again. They have sacrificed for many years to allow the population of horseshoe crabs to rebuild to this point where some harvest could be allowed without having any impact on the red knot migrating population. And so I figure this will be the best way to allow the stakeholders that have concerns about this to have their concerns heard through the actual arm process. And at the end of that, if the arm continues to recommend a small amount of female harvest, perhaps at that point that may be accepted. It may not be, but in any event, 2 years should be ample time to allow this whole process to work out. And that was my rationale. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Discussion on the motion. Mr. Semino.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to staff for the presentation. I'm not opposed to the motion. I'm going to support it for the reasons I agree with John. I think, we have set something in motion here. We're going to be having further discussions on, exactly what the arm means and the the utility functions, but with my support, as the seconder of the motion pointed out, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're moving into female harvest in 2 years. It's a reconsideration at that time. So that's all I'm happy to support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Semino. Any further discussion? Ms. Costa?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a clarifying question for staff. I know it's the next agenda item, but is the 2 years, until we revisit 2028 specifications, is that enough time to go through the stakeholder planning process and then rerun the ARM?
Thanks for the question. I think, as we all know, it's pretty variable how long it can take to complete a process like this. Yes, in an ideal world, it would be enough time. I think there are definitely, this is an issue that does require a lot of discussion. And so depending on the types of changes that would be considered and how much discussion the board wants to have about those and the public input that you all want to receive about it as well, it could take longer than that. I would say 2 years is most likely sufficient, but it's really not. I can't say for sure.
All set. Any other questions from the board? Mr. Clark?
Not a question, but just along that line, I just say, I think the 2 years also gives a deadline to hopefully get through the stakeholder process, get everything set and revisit this. So sometimes it's good to have a date certain where you want to get some results. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Gates?
Yeah, just another question, sort of along these same lines, is what are the consequences of if we don't get the stakeholder work done in the 2 years? Where does that leave us for that third year then?
Under Addendum 9, you have the possibility of setting multi-year specifications for males only for a total of 6 years. So if we were not through the stakeholder process and the board wanted to set another multi-year set of specifications for males only, you would be able to do that for up through 2031. So it wouldn't really affect your ability to set specifications, is what I'm trying to say.
Ms. Kearns?
You would run the ARM again to set your specifications. That would be what would happen. And if you set more than 2 years here and we finish the process in 2 years, the only difference would be you would need a 2/3 majority vote to undo your specification that you set.
Thank you. Back to the board. Any further discussion on the motion? Mr. Gates?
Yeah, I think with that explanation, I think I'd be more comfortable with a 3-year period. So I think I would, for discussion purposes at least, I think so. I'd like to make a motion to amend to add for 3 years.
So your motion to amend would read for 2026 through 2028.
Yep.
That's the change. Is there a second to Mr. Gates' motion? Mr. McKiernan, you second that motion? Mr. Gates?
Thanks. Yeah. So I think it's more or less the same justification as for the 2-year specifications, but it just gives us that third year to complete the work without having to run that ARM possibly run the ARM again with sort of the status quo conditions.
Thank you. Mr. McKiernan?
I would anticipate hearing from John Clark about the appropriateness of this, but that's all.
Okay. Mr. Clark?
Yes, thanks. And Dan, you anticipated correctly. Yeah, I would, I certainly understand we gave ourselves the options to set these specifications for 3 years, but as I pointed out, we're now in, what is this, year 4 already of having the new ARM. As you recall, even under the old ARM, we were at a point where the estimates were saying that we could they recommended a small amount of female harvest even under the old arm. I think the arm, as the population estimates show for both horseshoe crabs and red knots, that the arm has been successful. It's done just what it's said it would do. And I think, as I've said earlier, that 2 years is a good balance. You know, I think I didn't want to imply that stakeholders had not had input into the old arm or the new arm. I mean, I think the whole process has been very transparent, has gotten a lot of input from stakeholders across the spectrum for horseshoe crabs. And at this point, as I said, I think it sends the wrong signal to our traditional harvest community that as a board, we're just kind of kicking this issue, you know, we're just going to give it another 3 years. I mean, we have I'd say a legitimate reason here to give it a couple of years of more of male only to get this stakeholder input into this process. But I think that having that date certain is helpful, both to concentrate the attention of the board and to let our entire public know that we're just revisiting this until we can get this additional input. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Ms. Starks? Yes, please.
I think the chair just wanted me to clarify that just for everyone's knowledge. So in a situation, if you were to set 3 years of 500,000 males today, if the stakeholder process were completed and we had the ability to run the arm with the new changes that are hypothetically adopted in this scenario, before the 3 years are over and the board wanted to use the results of that new arm, you could ask us to run the arm in year 2 or whatever point you want us to run the arm with the new changes. And then you could use that to set specification, change the specifications before the 3-year period is over. I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion and a motion to amend, and I'm gonna let's talk about them both so we can get that out of the way. Ms. Costa.
I just wanted to clarify, if we do revisit the specifications before the 3 years is up, we need a 2/3 majority vote, but we can still do it.
Okay, thank you. To the board. Anybody else but Mr. Clark want to have a say there? Kennedy, go ahead.
I prefer the 3-year specifications just because I think it gives us more flexibility. And while I am hopeful and optimistic that we can do it in 2, and I'd like that to be our goal, I think it behooves us to have 3 years and not have to run the model before then just to extend it.
Thank you, Ms. Vice Chair. Appreciate it. Anybody else? Mr. Semino, don't worry, John. I'll get to you, John. Don't worry.
If you don't mind, one more bite at the apple, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I struggle with this. New Jersey has a moratorium in place. I expect that to stay in place. There's a lot at stake for some of the species, but I still support the main motion because I feel like, this is a discussion on what we consider. And, we had this conversation when the arm was approved that we're kind of walking, like the best available science is out there and is saying that there is some safe harvest level. So I don't want to walk away from that discussion in best available science. I'm not saying that in a couple of years I'm going to be willing to support female harvest, but I think the continued discussion is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Semino. Anybody else? Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your indulgence and letting me speak again. I mean, after hearing Caitlin's explanation, both motions pretty much will have the same impact. I mean, you could, as mentioned, if it was 3 years, yes, you could revisit it in 2 years with a 2/3 majority. But I still think the original motion, the signal it's sending out is that we want to get this process done in 2 years. As we all know, a job will tend to take as long as is allocated to it, just like a contract will cost as much as is allocated to it. So I think that giving ourselves the 2 years is sending the right signal to the entire spectrum of the stakeholders interested in this, is that we're taking this seriously. We want to get more input. The ARM model has been peer reviewed. It's been shown to be one of the first and best ecological models that's taking into account both the harvest of horseshoe crabs and its potential impact on the migrating shorebirds. So I really think we need to go with the original motion of 2 years. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Anybody in the public would like to address the motions that are on the board? Yes, sir. Please state your name and any affiliation you may have or have had in the past, and perhaps your recipe for cookies would be fine as well.
Yeah, I'm Pat Augustine, former member of this illustrious body for 16 years. And here we are, kicking a can down the road, discussing something that was so clearly stated as being the right decision and motion by Mr. Clark and Mr. Borden, and just wasting a bunch of time, drawn away. I would make a motion to either table the substitute motion or amend the motion, or table it forever and pass judgment on the original motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Augustine. Anybody else in the audience? Anybody online? Seeing none, back to the board. Is there any further discussion on either of these motions before we go down the road of the vote? Okay, so first we're going to address the motion to amend. Is there any need to caucus? Okay, I believe there is two sides to this motion, so we will take a vote. Raise your hands. All those in favor, please raise your hands and keep them up so Ms. Kearns can count.
Rhode Island, Connecticut. Is that Chris? North Carolina. And U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Put your hands down. All those opposed, raise your hands, please.
Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, Maryland, PRFC, Virginia, and Delaware. I apologize. It's very hard to see faces at the other end of the table.
Any abstentions? Any null votes? Motion fails 4-10 by my count. Okay. So now the underlying motion is now the main motion. Any further discussion? Seeing none, is there any need to caucus? Seeing none. Is there any opposition to the motion on the board? Seeing none, is there any null or abstentions? Seeing none, motion passes by unanimous consent. Ms. Starks, that's it for this item? Okay, thank you very much. So let's move on to our next presentation. Ms. Starks, 2 or 3 or 4. She's only got another half a dozen to go after this. So Ms. Starks, stakeholder engagement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to provide some updates on the stakeholder engagement process that we've mentioned today. To start off with a quick review of the background, in July 2024, we held a stakeholder workshop that convened a small group of stakeholders representing the environmental NGO, fishing, biomedical, bird and horseshoe crab scientists, and management, and folks with an interest in this issue, to discuss the adaptive resource management framework and objectives for the Delaware Bay region bait fishery. And one of the key consensus recommendations from that workshop was to refine the ARM framework's reward and utility functions with stakeholder input. And as a reminder, the utility, reward, and harvest policy functions, or URH functions as we're abbreviating them, are equations in the ARM framework that are reflective of the values of the stakeholders. So the board tasked the ARM subcommittee with discussing these functions and recommending a process for getting stakeholder input on them to inform possible changes. And the ARM subcommittee recommended a multi-step process with engagement of various stakeholder groups led by a third-party facilitator or facilitators with expertise in structured decision-making. And in May 2025, the board supported pursuing this approach. So after the May meeting, the commission put out a request for proposals for facilitators with the specific expertise, it's early today, needed for this process. And we've contracted with Compass Resource Management. And we did a press release a month or two ago requesting applications for participants in this process, and invitations were recently sent out to a group of stakeholders to participate in the full process and an in-person workshop. And we've also had already several planning meetings with the Compass team to develop an overarching plan and schedule and content for stakeholder meetings. The process that we've outlined includes several steps, and the first in that is over the next few weeks, Compass will be scheduling small group calls with each stakeholder group. And for the purposes of this process, the participant groups are the bait fishery, dealers, biomedical, shorebird conservation, horseshoe crab conservation, and ecosystem conservation. However, we do recognize there's a lot of overlap in these groups, so we're hoping to dig into that during this process. The purpose of these calls is for Compass to provide information to the participants about what the process is going to look like and expectations, and also to enhance their understanding of the different perspectives of each of these stakeholder groups ahead of the workshop. The next step will be a series of educational meetings or webinars in they will be virtual in November or December, and these will be to establish the scope of the workshop discussions and goals and increase the participants' understanding of the utility, reward, and harvest policy functions of the ARM framework, and to review differences between the original and the revised ARM frameworks, and generally allow for an open discussion between the technical experts and stakeholders to allow for more understanding of this entire system. And these webinars will also be open to all stakeholders, not just the selected workshop participants, to broaden understanding outside of just this group. And then step 3 will be the in-person stakeholder workshop, and we're aiming to schedule this for January. Federal shutdown has kind of complicated our planning process because we do have a lot of federal partners involved, but we're hoping to keep this on track for January. And this will be the core of the process where the selected active participants who represent these various groups within the Delaware Bay bait fishery will come together and participate in a structured process to elicit information about their values related to horseshoe crab management. And the Compass team is highly experienced in this type of process, so they'll be running the show to make sure the ARM subcommittee gets the information they need to perform any or inform any potential changes to the URH functions. After that workshop, the ARM subcommittee and the Delaware Bay Ecosystems TC will have to meet to review all the information gathered at the stakeholder workshop and translate that into possible changes to those functions to better align with current stakeholder values. And the ARM subcommittee will perform the technical work to develop alternative functions, review these with the Delaware Bay Ecosystem TC, and the two committees will make recommendations to the board on how to move forward. And then finally, the board will meet most likely in May 2026 at the spring meeting to review updated ARM runs and proposed alternative functions developed based on the stakeholder input. And if there's a desire to pursue those changes at that time, it would need to initiate an addendum to consider adopting the changes to the URH functions. With that, I can take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Starks. Any questions? Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Caitlin. Just want to check, is Compass the same group that did the workshop last year?
No, it is not. So last year's workshop was conducted by Christina Weaver, and she's based in Virginia. Compass is actually a firm based out of the West Coast in Canada, Vancouver area. So it is a new party that is new to this process, and I think that'll bring some fresh eyes into the mix.
Any other questions from the board? Go ahead, John.
Just a follow-up question. So the process you said should be ready for the board to review by this next May. So just to follow up on the motion that we just approved, this should give the board time to approve or review what they've done and hopefully decide on specifications. You know, be ready, because we're not even talking about setting different specifications until 2028. So this actually gives, I would say, a lot of time for the board to consider this.
Yeah, just to follow up, I think, there is still more uncertainty around the time it would take to complete the addendum process, because if the board initiates an addendum in May, the earliest it could be completed would be for October, which is when you all set specifications typically. So, given the complexity of these value-based functions, I think, it might take more time than that to complete the addendum process.
Anybody else on the board with a question? Anybody in the public? Anybody online? Okay, Ms. Starks, thank you very much. Let's move on to Ms. Starks. We're going to consider action.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Next up is the FMP review for the 2024 fishing year. So I'm going to go over the status of the FMP, the fishery management plan, the status of the stock, the status of the fishery, and the PRT's review of the state compliance with the FMP provision, and finally the recommendations. This is a quick summary of the management for horseshoe crab at the Commission. Our FMP was approved in 1998 and has been modified by 9. Most recently is Addendum 9 in 2025, which allows for the multi-year male-only specs. And then before that, in 2022, you all adopted Addendum 8, which implements the new ARM revision. For stock status, horseshoe crab stock status is based on the 2019 benchmark assessment and the 2024 update to that assessment. And the stock status is determined using the results of the AREMA analysis in the assessment, and it's based on the number of surveys in each region or coastwide that are currently below the index level in 1998. And 1998 is used as the reference point because this represents the point in time when horseshoe crabs became actively managed by ASMFC. So status relative to that 1998 point gives an indication of the effects of management on populations. And the 2024 update to the assessment indicates that the stock status of the Northeast region remains neutral. The New York region status continues to be poor, with 3 out of 4 surveys being below the 1998 reference points. And then the Delaware Bay and coastwide statuses improved from neutral to good since the 2019 benchmark, and the Southeast status has remained good as well. The assessment also produced abundance estimates for the Delaware Bay population using the CMSA that Dr. Nehemiah went over, but that is not used for stock status. This figure is showing the annual values of reported horseshoe crab bait landings in orange, biomedical collections in light blue, and the estimated biomedical mortality in dark blue. And the values are in millions of crabs. Bait landings since about 2003 have fluctuated around the same level, and in the last 8 years or so, there has been an increasing trend in biomedical collections, that the light blue bars, and the mortality associated with that. The total reported harvest in 2023 was 550,909 crabs, and that excludes confidential landings. This is a 25% decrease from the 2023 landings and 34.6% of the Commission's overall coastwide quota for horseshoe crabs. The states of Massachusetts, New York, Virginia, Delaware, and Maryland make up 99.9% of the total for 2024, with Massachusetts and New York harvesting the highest numbers. And states with greater than 5% of the coastwide landings are required to report sex-specific data for at least a portion of their bait harvest. And for 2024, those states were Massachusetts, New York, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. And within these states, excluding Massachusetts because their data were not yet available, 77% of the reported bait landings were male, 21% were female, and 2% were unclassified in 2024. And for biomedical, in 2024, the number of crabs collected for the sole purpose of LAL production in the biomedical industry was 1,073,329 crabs, and this is a 3% decrease from 2023. The estimated biomedical mortality was 184,693, and this is 15% of the total crabs that are bled, plus the observed mortalities reported by each state. The biomedical mortality represents about 25% of the total directed mortality, so that's bait harvest plus biomedical mortality, which was about 735,000 crabs in 2024. So compared to 2023, there was a 20% decrease in the overall mortality, including bait harvest and biomedical mortality in 2024. And here you can see how those two pieces compare to each other with this graph showing the overall mortality. The orange area is the bait harvest mortality and the blue area is the estimated biomedical mortality. The PRT plan review team had a few notes to highlight from the compliance report reviews. All states appear to be in compliance with the FMP measures. The only issue is that Massachusetts was not able to submit a compliance report by the deadline. Changes in state regulations include that Connecticut prohibited hand harvest of horseshoe crabs and eggs as of October 2023, and New York has implemented additional lunar closures in May and June to protect spawning crabs. For de minimis status, states can qualify if their combined average landings for the last 2 years are less than 1% of the coast-wide bait landings for that 2-year period. And South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida have requested and meet the de minimis criteria. And then the recommendations from the PRT are to continue to prioritize long-term funding for the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey, as that is critical for our current management program. And they also recommend working towards getting annual estimates of horseshoe crab discard removals from other fisheries. So that wraps up the FMP reviews, and the board action for consideration is to approve the FMP review for the 2024 fishing year, state compliance reports, and de minimis requests.
Okay, any questions from the board? Mr. Hasbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So yeah, I have 2 questions. On the slide for bait harvest that you had up earlier, if you could go back to that, please. No, next one, I think. No, it wasn't a graph. It was a table. Whoop. That one. Okay. So total 2024 coastwide harvest was 550,908 crabs. And then there's a footnote at the bottom. Well, I shouldn't say a footnote. There's a bullet at the bottom that says mass data not provided. Does that mean the Massachusetts data was not provided and is not included in that 550,000, or just of percent male and female were not provided? That's my first question.
I believe it's just the percent male and female, but I can check very quickly and make sure.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question had to do with the funding for the survey. Where's that? That's in place through 2026. Where's that funding currently coming through?
Yeah, thanks, Emerson. The funding for the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey, sorry about that, comes through an appropriation line in the federal budget, and it comes ultimately from the Science Center, Northeast Fisheries Science Center.
Thank you.
It's been consistent for, I don't know, close to a decade now, quite a while. So it's, once funding is in the federal budget for that long, it's relatively easy to keep it going. It's a lot easier than getting new funding. So I think we're in a pretty good space there with consistent funding.
Well, in the past, it's been easy to keep it going. Who knows what we're going to see going forward, right? But hopefully it stays in the budget. Thank you.
Mr. Miller, then Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may follow up, Bob, is that funding something we need to work on at the legislative committee level, or not?
Well, that is one of our funding priorities every year when we go to Capitol Hill with our funding priorities. So we are working on that. We keep Alexander and I reiterate that anytime we're meeting with appropriation staff or anyone else that can help us out. So obviously it's important. Emerson sort of alluded to it. The funding cycle that we're in right now probably has less certainty than some of the previous ones. So, as it goes forward, we'll see what the president's budget looks like, is going to propose for next year, and we can react to that. But, individual states going to their individual offices does carry a lot of weight. So I think we can, we'll keep you all informed on how this is progressing, and we can set up some meetings for, folks around the table if they want us to. Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Caitlin. I just wanted to point out that, at least for Delaware, I mean, there's a bit of dissonance right here between what was actually landed last year, only 35% of the quota, as opposed to what the population estimates show. And I know for Delaware, it was not for lack of horseshoe crabs, it was because of the market. And I think, Greg, you probably saw the same thing happen where the price for them, we only harvest male horseshoe crabs in Delaware. The price was low. I know one of our dealers told us that he was kind of limiting the number that he could get sold at any given time. So just wanted to point out it was not because the crabs weren't there.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Semino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just going back to some of the comments on the Virginia Tech Trawl Survey. I don't think, there's been enough kudos to Bob and Alexander. I know we're dealing with a government shutdown and we're uncertain on the budget, but from the drafts that we've seen from both House and Senate, Virginia Tech Trawl Survey is in there. And I think that is that tremendous effort that we've never let our foot off that pedal. And to Roy's question, I don't think we ever should. Whether or not year after year it helps, the fact is it's always something that we have to make a priority for us, and we'll talk about that later in the week as well. But I was very happy to see that in all the draft budgets so far, I think. Thank you.
It certainly doesn't hurt. And if any of you have the desire to go up to the Hill or find out who you have to contact to support that survey, Mr. Law would be more than happy to help you. So, anybody else? Oh, okay. Go ahead, Mr. Sir, I can't see your name. You don't have a name tag, and I'm blind, so it doesn't matter. Please state your affiliation and your name before you get going.
From Delaware, my name is Stuart Potter, and I see that you say last year 184,000 crabs were killed through the biomedical industry. I just want to know, why is that not considered a harvest and come off of each state's quota?
The FMP manages the bait quota and the biomedical quota, biomedical collection separately. It is accounted for. So those mortalities that occur from the biomedical industry are accounted for in our population model for the Delaware Bay bait specifications that we just discussed, but we do not have a quota for biomedical. So that's why it's not taken off of the bait quota.
Are you all set, sir?
Yeah, maybe it should come off the bait quota or another quota.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else in the audience? Anybody online? Okay, I'm looking for a motion to approve. Mr. Hasbrook?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make that motion. Staff has it prepared.
Go ahead, Emerson.
Move to approve the FMP review and state compliance reports for the 2024 fishing year and de minimis status for South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida.
Thank you. Is there a second to the motion? Mr. Grist, you second the motion? I don't think we need any rationale. Is there any discussion? Is there any opposition? Seeing none, motion passes by consent. Thank you very much. So just one more piece of business. We have some recommendations from the PRT. I don't think we have to have a motion. If there's any discussion on those recommendations, we can have it now. And if there is no opposition, I'd be happy to have nodding heads to approve that. Okay. It's approved. Okay, so that our last item of business is, if you remember at our last meeting, we held off on repopulating our AP to get the public another chance to get in the game. So what we did was we formed a working group to go through all the applications, and I want to thank Ms. Berger, Ms. Starks, and then the working group. There were a lot of qualified people, but the working group certainly. What's that? Oh, I'm sorry. Never mind. I'll let her talk. Goodbye.
I didn't want to have to make you go through all of that when I have it on the slides. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I will go over the summary of what that work group worked on. So again, this came out of the July 2024 stakeholder workshop, which again evaluated the ARM framework and thought about objectives. And one of the recommendations they made was also to evaluate the Horseshoe Crab Advisory Panel to determine if it had adequate representation across stakeholder groups. And so earlier this year, the board reviewed the AP membership and agreed it would be beneficial to consider reshaping the panel to have a more even distribution of advisors from each region or more equitable distribution. And additionally, it decided to conduct an open solicitation process for additional non-traditional stakeholder seats. So the board formed a work group to look at all of this, and that work group consisted of several commissioners. They reviewed new nominations and developed recommendations on appropriate distributions of advisors by region and user group, which that work group met over the summer. They reviewed a total of 14 nominations that were submitted for non-traditional stakeholders and 3 nominations for commercial fishery appointments. And regarding the overall distribution, these are the work group recommendations by region. So for the Northeast, they recommended 3 advisors, including 1 individual from the commercial fishery, 1 from biomedical industry, and 1 non-traditional stakeholder. For the Connecticut and New York region, they recommended 2 advisors, including 1 commercial fishery and 1 non-traditional stakeholder. For the Delaware Bay, they recommended a total of 13 advisors, recognizing the focus of this area for horseshoe crabs. And that includes 5 commercial fishery advisors, 3 biomedical, and 5 non-traditional stakeholders. And for the Southeast, the recommendation is 2 advisors, including 1 biomedical and 1 non-traditional stakeholder. And generally, these recommendations aim to balance the relative interests of each region and represent various gear types in the commercial fisheries, as well as diverse expertise among the non-traditional stakeholders, and also to make sure the overall size of the AP would result in more productive discussions within the group. So after a thorough review of all of the nominations that were submitted, the work group recommended appointing the following individuals to the AP by region, in addition to the current advisors sitting on the panel. For commercial fishery appointees, Edwin Chiofalo is representing the Connecticut, New York region, and he's from New York, a 2nd-generation fisherman with 40 years of on-the-water experience. Stuart Potter from Delaware is a 4th-generation fisherman that's been fishing for conch and hand harvesting horseshoe crabs since 1994. Pete Bender from Virginia is a longtime participant in the commercial fishery and harvests horseshoe crabs using dredge and trawl gear. And then non-traditional appointees include Helen Chang from Massachusetts, who has a Master of Science in Horseshoe Crab Population Dynamics and Behavior and serves on the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries Horseshoe Crab Science Committee. Jennifer Boudet, I'm sorry if I am mispronouncing any names, is a citizen scientist from Connecticut with over 10 years of experience observing horseshoe crabs and shorebird interactions, as well as logging tagged horseshoe crabs, and was endorsed by Representative Gresco that sits on the commission. Susan Linder from New Jersey is a wildlife biologist with the Wildlife Restoration Partnerships in New Jersey and assists with shorebird and horseshoe crab research. Tim Dillingham is from New Jersey, was a former executive director of the American Littoral Society. Glenn Govry from Delaware is the president of the Ecological Research and Development Group, which is a nonprofit focused on horseshoe crab conservation. Carly Tulin from Maryland is an environmental scientist for the Maryland Coastal Bays Program that assists with monitoring efforts related to horseshoe crabs and shorebirds. Jane Brockman from Florida is a professor emeritus of biology at the University of Florida and has conducted academic research on horseshoe crabs for 35 years. So this is a very qualified group of individuals recommending to be added. And there's one recommendation for a removal just based on a lack of activity on the panel, which is John Turner from New York. And then additionally, the work group's recommendations include that AP meeting attendance should be reviewed regularly to determine if additional changes to the panel are needed to make sure it's continuing to be active. And for the non-traditional advisor appointments, the recommendation is that they would serve a 4-year term consistent with the traditional commercial advisor seats. And then after 4 years, the board could consider renewing those appointments. And then to wrap up, the board action for consideration is to approve the recommendations to changes to the advisory panel membership today.
Thank you, Ms. Starks. Any questions from the board? Seeing none. We need a motion to approve. Ms. Kennedy?
Yes, to approve the changes to the advisory panel membership and council commission.
Yep, sorry. Move to approve the changes to the advisory panel membership as recommended in the work group memo dated October 10th, 2025.
Thank you. Is there a second to this motion? Ms. Costa? Discussion? Other than thank the working group for their effort, that's the discussion on my part. Any opposition? Seeing none, motion passes by consent. And there are working group recommendations on how to move forward over time. Is there any issues with that recommendation? Can we accept that recommendation as well? Seems that we can. Okay, is there any other business? Go ahead.
I just also wanted to express thanks for all of the applications that came in for advisory panel seats. There were a lot more applications than, or not a lot, but there was a large chunk of applications for this. So it was really encouraging to see the interest in the horseshoe crab management issues, and thanks to those who applied and were not approved today.
Okay, that brings us to other business. There is some other business, from New York. Is there anybody else that has any other business for horseshoe crabs today? Mr. Hornstein?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just had a couple things I want to speak about, and promise I'll keep it brief. First thing was related to the 2029 benchmark assessment. So really like to encourage the horseshoe crab stock assessment subcommittee to prioritize the integration of all the best available science into that benchmark. Data sets that begin after the 1998 reference year, including NEMAP trawl data and state-led spawning surveys, should be considered quantitatively alongside other longer-term surveys. These spawning surveys target adult horseshoe crabs, whereas most of the surveys that we utilize in the regional assessments catch horseshoe crabs as bycatch. Most of these spawning surveys are fixed station, but so are many of the surveys that we use in these regional assessments, like New York's beach sitting surveys. In the 1998 management plan, spawning survey data was recommended as the highest research priority for determining spawning stock biomass. And since then, many states have made significant investments in these surveys, including both financial. New York has spent over $1 million on the survey since it started, and in staff time and citizen scientists as well to conduct these surveys. And we just hope that all efforts can be made to incorporate that information into these regional assessments moving forward. The other thing I want to just provide a quick update on is the bill which would ban horseshoe crab harvest in New York. So last year, this bill was vetoed by Governor Hochul, and this year it was reintroduced and passed both legislative chambers again. And it's currently at the point where we're still waiting for the governor to make a decision on it. And just remind people, if the bill was to pass, there would be regional implications for horseshoe crab bait markets and availability. So for instance, New York's bulk fishery would continue to require horseshoe crabs as bait, and we'd have to look to other states to meet their needs. So impacts of this bill, would not only impact New York, but it would also reach broader regional impacts and across various fisheries as well. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ornstein, for your comments and your updates. Is there any other business? Motion to adjourn by everyone, opposed by no one. Thank you very much. Mr. Beal.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. We're going to